Hi, welcome to the Coaching Dimensions podcast, where people, policy and success come together. I'm Melissa Fazackerley, Director of Dimension H&S Limited and the host of Coaching Dimensions podcast. Remember to give us a like, follow and comment even before we get started. So before we get into today's conversation, I want to give you a quick heads up. Today we are going to be talking about suicide and mental health in the workplace. And while this is one of the most important discussions we can have, I know it can be difficult for some people to listen to. So if at any point today's episode brings up difficult feelings for you, don't feel like you need to keep listening. You can find details of where you can find support at the end of this episode and in the show notes. And these resources are available 24/7. So let's get into it. Today, I've got with me Rosie Russell and Marcus Long. We are going to talk about a brand new British standard in the workplace. So thank you for joining me, Marcus and Rosie. First off, Marcus, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hello. I would like to start off by kind of saying how I got kind of involved in the standard for two reasons, professional and personal. So let's do the professional one to start with. For the past 20 years, I've worked in the assurance industry. And the assurance industry is the industry that develops standards, helps organizations implement those through auditing those organizations against the standard so that they can make themselves better. They can become a better organization, whether those standards are about improving sustainability or an improved health and safety performance in a company or improving the quality of an organization's output. Doesn't matter at all. Standards and auditing against those standards are ways of making organizations better. And I actually run a trade association of organizations that carry out the auditing work for people to help them comply to the standard or to check their compliance to the standard and hopefully take them forward and be better as an organization. So that's the kind of professional side of how I got involved in the standard. And the personal side is because I lost my son Adam to suicide back in October 2020. Adam was 21 at the time, and whilst I really had no idea what had taken Adam to that decision, I knew something positive had to come out of that, and it took me 3 years to work it out. But like hopefully many of the best solutions, it was the simplest one actually, and that is, why don't I, from the experience of losing Adam to suicide, how combining that with what my industry does, can we stop the blight of suicide in the UK and, you know what, further afield as well? So that's where I came up with the idea of developing the standard. So that seemed like a very long introduction, didn't it? But I'll hand over to Rosie now.
So I'm Rosie Russell. I'm currently part of the presidential team at the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management. I'm also a Director of Environment, Health, Safety and Sustainability. I was approached to be part of the team behind this standard, mainly through my involvement with RRSM. However, what they didn't know at the time is I'm actually a survivor of suicide myself. Back in 2013, 2014, I made 2 attempts on my own life. And so I have a really personal interest in this subject. I'm now well. I don't take my mental health for granted. It's something I have to work on, sometimes daily, depending what's going on. But I am well, I am safe, and as a user of standards, as someone who has an interest in protecting people in the workplace and making the world better, this just seemed like an obvious opportunity for myself to actually give back to the community and help hopefully prevent some harm.
I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you both for sharing. I think it's really important that for our listeners and for our viewers to understand that actually it's not a theoretical standard, for want of a better phrase. This really, really can make a difference. I'm not even sure that we've mentioned the name of the standard yet. So it's BS 30480, right? And it's free to download. So we'll make sure we put a link in the comments and the post and everything like that. What I particularly like about it, and I'd love for you guys to kind of talk us through this one, but it covers prevention, intervention, and postvention, what happens afterwards. So, Rosie, I'm going to touch with you first on the prevention side of things. Can you kind of give us what that looks like?
Certainly, I'll start off with an appalling statistic, and that's that 1 in 7 deaths by suicide is work-related to some extent. And that really gives us the validity of making the standard about suicide and the workplace. Also, work for many people is such a core part of their identity and a source of support for the majority of people who go to work, however much they might complain about it. But the standard from the prevention point of view asks organizations to take a look at not just the support that it provides, but its systems and how they can be supportive as opposed to a strain or a stress on the individual. So many organizations may have, for instance, mental health first aiders or first responders. That's great. And that will help a lot of people when they're having a bit of a bad time. But if we think about mental health as a scale from 10 up here, we're really good, to 1 or even 0, mental health first aid tends to deal with 10 down through to probably about 4. It's not that well equipped for that bit right at the bottom where things get really, really dark. So the question then is your organization fixed up and ready to support people there? What would your line managers do if an employee said, I am having thoughts of taking my own life? For whatever reason, doesn't have to be work, could be at home. I think most line managers would probably run a mile. Also, in terms of your own systems, do they actually make things work? Work for the employee, or do they make things worse? So if you think about a lot of standard processes such as performance, your PIPs, your performance improvement plans, or punishment in preparation, as someone referred to them once, redundancy, grievance, disciplinary, all of these can be so anxiety provoking as to lead someone who was otherwise mentally healthy into the space where they might consider taking their own life. Also, in terms of the line managers, within the standard, we have a toolkit there for line managers that helps prepare them or can be referred to if they land up in this situation. So it's really twofold in terms of the prevention. It's equipping HR and line managers and the organization to support, but also making sure that your policies and procedures are not making things worse.
That's a really good point, that actually, because I think sometimes we can use all these processes and procedures in siloed environments, can't we? And we've got all these different specialists within the organisation. That's a challenge.
Yeah, I think,
I mean,
Melissa,
certainly. Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Rosie.
I was just going to briefly say, if you landed up with somebody who had a very severe disciplinary case or grievance raised against them, you could see that could provoke an existential crisis. Now, they might have done something that's beyond the pale for anybody, but they're still a human. They still deserve to be treated with respect. And actually, in situations like that, they can feel remarkably alone. So having a trained buddy who can actually look after someone who might be the perpetrator of something actually is a simple step that most organizations can take that actually will make the whole process far more smooth, because you know that that person has support. So as well as supporting the aggrieved person, we have to support, the potential perpetrator. So that's a really simple thing that organizations can do, and it's a really, I think, clever pivot that I've seen some organizations do. Sorry, Marcus.
Yeah, because I think that what Rosie has highlighted there, Melissa, is that the the issues around suicide can be multifaceted, can be really simple, um, but actually, an awful lot of the time, a workplace will have no idea that they carry that risk in the individuals because they don't know how every single individual actually feels. So the workplace kind of has two roles. One is to do the right thing itself, so it doesn't, by its own actions, actually put someone at greater risk. But also, the workplace is there, let's be brutal, to get the best out of its employees and its workers. And if someone does have suicidal thoughts, whether because the workplace has created that or exaggerated that, or because of the things that are going on in that person's life outside of work, the workplace can help out. And that's exactly where this standard comes in, because every organization will carry a risk around suicide. Now, to take the kind of micro example of me, I had no idea that Adam was going to take his life. Businesses, organizations, workplaces will, to a very large extent, probably be exactly the same. They've probably never thought about it. They've never thought it's an issue. And I think that's the first hurdle that we have to get over with this standard, is to say to people, you carry this risk as an organization. Because I'm sure there are a massive number of organizations that just go, no, that's not me. No one's ever said that to me. No one in my organization has ever gone into HR, filled out their annual employee satisfaction form and says, I have suicidal thoughts. People, that's just not reality, is it? So by having this as a standard, as Rosie said, she's used standards in her organizations before. People know about standards to a certain extent. They might have come across ISO 9001 quality standard. They might have used a standard to manufacture something. So actually, it just comes at it from another angle, and it says to organizations, have you thought of the fact that a standard about suicide can help your organization out? And then it's just a subset, it's just a part of your risk management approach, albeit in a very different subject. But when I look at one of the inspirations for this was BSI producing a standard on the menopause and menstrual health. And here again was another subject that a whole bunch of people hadn't thought about before, hadn't thought they needed to do something. So again, the publication of a BSI standard, which is now becoming an ISO standard, can actually appeal to a whole new group of people that go, oh, okay, I need to do something about that because I need to help the workers in my organisation out better. I need to manage the risk in my organisation.
So my background is construction. So I always find it really, I don't know what word to use here, but I always find it bizarre when people are surprised that somebody has taken their own life in such a demanding industry where it's an industry well known for suicide. I always find it quite bizarre, the surprise that comes along with it. And I don't know if it's a high risk industry as it is. It really needs to form part of their own risk management strategy, like you guys said.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, in the construction industry, you're looking at losing 3 to 4 people per day to suicide, compared to the about 1 per week through a workplace fatal accident. Where does our risk lie? And I think this is one of the beauties of this standard is it is at its heart a risk management standard. That's something that I was very much able to bring as a health and safety practitioner, was making sure that it had that focus at its core.
So we're still on prevention here. So what kind of conversations can people have in the workplace? Because it is a sensitive subject. How can we go about it? How can we understand our colleagues better to spot any signs if there are any?
There was a campaign in Scotland many years ago now when they were trying to normalise mental health. And it was quite simple. It was ask twice. Because when we say, how are you? Usually when you meet somebody in the morning, it's another form of greeting. It's no different to hello. But when you ask somebody a second time, you break that, because people go, well, I've already answered you. Yeah, but something doesn't seem quite right today. And for most people, I would say, if you hold that one thing in your back pocket, you can save a life. But it's more than being ready for the response and actually being willing to listen. And actually, if you do think that somebody is at risk, being quite direct and asking them, are they having thought of suicide or self-harm? You will get an honest answer, because people will either recoil at the very thought, or in my experience, you tend to get silence. And all I can say is hold that silence, because at the end of it, they will answer you.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think, specifically about the standard, Melissa, it actually, I think two of the words that we use so much to describe this standard are practical and pragmatic. So actually, it's just, it's opening the door for people. And the standard does things like it, right at the beginning, it talks about certain myths around suicide, because I think through ignorance, and there's no pointing the finger about ignorance around the issue of suicide. We're hoping to help people out through this standard and lower that ignorance. And actually, just by directly saying, here's a myth you might have heard of about suicide, let's undo that myth, because then it builds people's confidence. Because that's one of the crucial things that this standard will do, is it will give people the confidence to ask the kind of questions that Rosie's just talked about. But maybe more than anything else that we've potentially seen in this kind of work, is it then goes on. It then goes on to say to people, here are some ways that we can help you out. So having kind of busted the myths, the standard then gives people some language tips as well. It helps them through the language, because aligned with sometimes ignorance, there can also be fear. There can be fear of saying the wrong thing. And again, we help people through that in the standard with the language that's used to say to people, here's what you can do to feel more confident about what you're doing. And this is where I really pay tribute to the people that put the standard together, because they are an unbelievable group of people who came along with professional experience and who came along with lived experience of suicide. And by sharing their knowledge and their understanding and their heartfelt beliefs and thoughts, they were able to put something together that was practical for people to use. And I think actually that the lived experience combined with people having worked in the healthcare system, in suicide prevention, in industry, and a whole range of different places gave us that brilliant combination amongst the drafting panel of creating this amazingly pragmatic standard. And it's a standard that allows people to pick out of it what they want. And I think that's one of the other things about reducing that fear and that kind of ignorance bit. You don't have to do everything the standard says. What you need to do as an organisation is find the things where your risk is greatest. Use the standard to then mitigate those risks. And that way you will make a difference. And I love the way that the standard has been created like that, as a genuinely pragmatic and practical standard that helps people out who are fearful, who don't understand, who are worried about it. The people who end up doing nothing because they're so fearful rather than doing something. And that's what we want to do with the standard. We really want people to go, okay, I get it here. There's some tools here. I can make a difference. I can do something about this. And I think that's brilliant.
That is brilliant. I think at the very least, just read the standard as an individual. Just read it.
And I think actually that is now imperative for all organizations, because until this standard came along, there was fragmented guidance in various places. Some NHS trusts, some councils had prevention guidance. There was nothing that was unified. There is now, and it's free. So I'm afraid there is now a call to action. I think if organizations are now doing nothing, I don't use the word negligence often, but the fact that there is a free guide that is publicly available, you really need to be doing something. And as Marcus says, it doesn't say you have to swallow the whole thing whole, but what it does do, especially in Annex E, is allow you to audit yourself and figure out where your highest risks are, and then do something.
Yeah, just do something.
Yeah. And I think this is, as I always describe this is the kind of standards nerdy bit, is that standards are broadly a requirement document or they're a guidance document. A requirement document is full of the word shall do this. You shall do this, meaning you must do it. This is a guidance document, so it enables you to use out of it. As the word suggests, it guides you through what you can do and how you can make a difference with this. And I've had experience of talking to people about this standard, from giant organizations with tens of thousands of employees through to someone who read the standard, then realized that when they talked to their teenage daughter about a problem that she was having, the standard gave them some inspirational ideas with that. So actually, to me, there's just a brilliant example of how this standard operates at so many different levels. And that's why I'm kind of with Rosie on this. Just pick it up and use it. There is something for everyone in here. There is so much help in there. Rosie talked about checklists. there are, in the annexes, there are a variety of different tools that just enables people to roll their sleeves up instantly. There is a toolkit for working out how you could do training. There's a toolkit for the HR team. There's a toolkit for senior leadership, who, of course, like so many standards, are a vital element in leading the organisation to take forward the right things to do. So there's so many helpful and practical ways that people can help themselves. Even the self-evaluation and benchmarking section, it's a series of questions. And an organisation can look at that and look at the questions, and they then have an understanding of where they are. And they then have an understanding about where they need to take their organisation. So, massively practical ways of doing things. And frankly, if someone doesn't find something that chimes in this for their organisation, then I will fall off my chair. There literally is something for any size organisation. You don't have to be a multinational. You can be a tiny organisation, but you want to do something better. It doesn't matter what size organisation you are. There are things here that will help you.
Amazing. We talked a lot about prevention then. Can we just briefly touch on intervention? Because this sounds like the scariest part to me. As an individual, this kind of sounds like, oh, okay, something needs to be done. What if I do the wrong thing?
To be honest, as long as you're willing to discuss it, you're not doing the wrong. The intervention bit, you've got to be prepared. So you've got to have preparedness within your organization, trained individuals who are not afraid to have this discussion. You've also got to remember that we are not each other's keepers. So there is a limit to what you can do. If an individual is willing to have the conversation, is willing to be kept safe, and is willing to engage with the appropriate services, whether that be a mental health crisis line, whether it be your EAP, whether it be the police, because they are so severely at risk, they need to be taken to a place of safety, then you can do something. If, on the other hand, somebody is not willing to engage in that, then you can have all the trained people in the world, but you cannot detain someone. So I think in many ways the intervention piece is probably the smallest piece of the standard.
I think the other thing for me is maybe it doesn't give people an answer to intervention instantaneously. But there's so much that the standard talks about that I think is about creating the right culture in the organisation. And actually, the moment you start shifting the culture, and I think particularly on suicide, it's kind of like, it's kind of like a train starting. It can be really hard work to start with, but when you get going and you get some momentum and you start adding more people in who understand and can do things, you get that momentum and going. And I think that's where the kind of, whether it's getting a train going or whether it's jumping into a cold load of water, dip your foot in there and get going with it. And there are so many ways that it will help you build the right culture. And I think once you start cracking that nut, the other things will just become easier, because you're getting rid of those two awkward words I talked about before, of ignorance and confidence. That the culture can just ends up supporting people. It becomes perpetuating it becomes self-fulfilling. The more you can do that, and the standard really does help you to start building that. And it's not building some enormous thing right from day one. It's a gradual thing. It's getting more and more people involved. It's getting more and more people to understand. And I think that's why I want to talk about it from my experience with Adam, because I didn't know that was going to happen. And I want people to realize that in their organization. They don't necessarily know what's going to happen. But actually, when you have a standard like this, it just opens your eyes to not only what the risks are, but also what the answers are. Most importantly, what the answers are and how we can help people out.
It all seems so simple, doesn't it? Like on a human level, it is just so simple. But I think because it's such a challenging subject and an emotive subject, like people can just readily kind of avoid that, because sometimes the technical stuff's a bit easier and it's a bit less challenging for us.
But actually, Melissa, I love what you say there about it's so simple, because it is in a way, because this is just a standard like any other kind of standard. So if you're used to a standard, then I don't know, you're halfway there, you're 10% there. At least you've started, because you realise that you understand how the process works, how what a standard is there for. And I'm not saying that there's some kind of secret squirrel society about how a standard works. That's far from it, because as I've said before, this is so practical, this standard. It really is brilliant. But actually, it's making people realise that a standard on suicide in the workplace is, as standards are, exactly the same as other standards are. They will make your organisation better. Now, this one also saves people's lives as well. And, how brilliant is that?
That's pretty awesome. So, yeah, tell us some more about postvention, what it means and what it looks like.
So for me, this is your crisis response piece. And it's vitally important, because somewhere, I think it's 135 to 165 people will be affected by a death by suicide. Now, that number isn't plucked out of the air. That's, if we think about it, that's the main people that we actually contact with in our lives. The scary one is the 10 to 15 people who will be so deeply affected by that death that they'll consider taking their own lives. And we've got to be able to get to those people, whoever they are. Now, in an organization, we don't know who might be at the most risk, and thus who we might lose to suicide. So the organization then needs to be able to act without thinking. So your postvention plan to communicate in a compassionate way, and for there to be a cascade of support from the top to the bottom of the organization, needs to be written in advance. You need to have things like scripts for managers to use, email templates to go out to recognize that something has happened and we don't know the full details. But we're going to pause for a moment and we're going to check in on every single person in the organization. That needs to be pre-written. It also needs to acknowledge that there are some barriers we would normally protect that we don't protect in this case, such as holiday. You don't want somebody hearing through the rumour mill. This is one of the few occasions where someone would get a phone call on holiday from an appropriate person and be read a script, because we don't want to get this wrong. So we need to think about that beforehand. And I've seen a number of postvention plans. They're short. They're necessarily short. And it's quite literally fill in the blanks, because the person who's enacting this might be one of those 10 to 15 people that's so deeply affected they might be thinking about taking their own lives. So that postvention plan that just allows an organization to take a beat, say this has happened, this is the support that's available, and then try and get things back to normal as quickly as possible and say, perhaps we'll mark this later when it's more appropriate and we know more. That's key. That for me, if you do one thing, I think even before training people to deal with someone who might be suicidal, that postvention plan will save lives.
Yeah, and lots of standards have a kind of a bottom drawer element in them. Pull out when you need to, be prepared for it. And again, the standard really helps people with that, because there are checklists on this exact issue that hopefully nobody ever has to deal with that in a workplace. Hopefully, I started off wanting this standard to save any lives. I want this standard to save every life. I don't know why I've gone from one to the other, but I have, because I don't want anyone to feel the pain that I know that people feel. And so what the standard does is, in having the checklist, it enables people to prepare for that. And it enables them to prepare their communication, because I think the number one key on that issue is about communicating. It's about how you do it both efficiently, with the right level of emotion, and effectively. You've got to do all of those things together, and actually that's where you do need some preparedness about it. And as an organisation, there are inevitably, with some standards, there's some things that you just have to put in place to get yourself ready for whether something does or doesn't happen. And the standard really helps people through that, because I think that must be a really daunting thing to do in an organisation, to say, oh, crikey, so you mean it's going to happen in my organisation? Well, that's exactly what this standard is about. Yes, it could happen in your organisation, so prepare yourself for it. We all hope like mad you don't have to pull it out the bottom drawer, but if you do, you're ready, and you are going to do the best thing by everybody when you're prepared.
And a couple of key statistics that might help people think about the urgency to do something about this. In their lifetime, 1 in 5 people will have suicidal ideation. This is not a fleeting thought that I shouldn't be here. This is consistent, persistent thoughts of death. Of those people with suicidal ideation, 1 in 4 will go on to make a plan. 1 in 10 will make an attempt. Those numbers should be really quite shocking to everybody, but it means that over a lifetime, if you've got 100 people in your workforce, you can expect 20 people to have suicidal ideation. You can expect 2 people to make an attempt.
And I think there's really good examples of that. And I think all of us will have had this when we've gone out and talked to different communities about this, different groups about this, whether it's, Rosie and I did an event a couple of weeks ago for one particular industry, but we've also gone out and talked to people who work in kind of suicide prevention as a community. And it is extraordinary how many people come up to you and say, this is how I feel about things, or I've lost this relative or this friend, or so-and-so at work has talked to me about it. When you put your head above the parapet about suicide, it is extraordinarily powerful and pleasing in a way that people do come up and talk to you, but also horrific at the same time. Because quite often there are people who you've met in your life before who you didn't know this was going on in their lives, and you kind of go, wow, you're in terms of how you feel about suicide, you are like a duck. It's as calm up there as I can imagine, and underneath, I didn't know all of that was happening. So let me say, from my personal experience of getting involved with this work, it is as prevalent as the numbers say. This is not just a myth. This is not just something to make people do something. This is not just something to get more downloads of the standard. This is reality. This is how it happens. You look at the numbers, more people dying of suicide in Australia than die on the roads. And everybody talks about road traffic safety and spending billions of pounds around the globe improving road traffic safety, and nobody talks about suicide prevention in this with anything like the same level. So it is relevant. Don't hide away and don't think it won't happen in your organisation. And we don't want to frighten people. We want to help people, and that's what this standard does. And maybe, Melissa, going back to what you said at the beginning, we need to keep on saying BS 30480 will help people. So keep on reminding people what the number is so they can get out there and download it, read it, and implement it.
And I am one health and safety person who has been working in health and safety now for slightly over 25 years. I dealt with 3 unexplained deaths. 1 confirmed as a suicide. 1 strongly suspected. The other one was not. It was, it looks like it was probably a stroke, but they were found dead at work. But that's just me, and I've dealt with 3 cases where this standard would have been useful and would have made our organisation's response better.
That's huge. Thank you so much for today, guys. I think, have you got one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation today?
It's not rocket science, folks. You can save lives.
Yeah, mine's really simple. Download the thing, read through it, and get people motivated about using it. And it's brilliant. It's an amazing standard that amazing people have put together, and every organisation will find something from it. So download it, read through it, and get people involved.
By the way, I smile every time Marcus says it's brilliant because he is on the communications panel. He was not part of writing the standard. So it's always, I guess, heartening to see Marcus's reaction as he instigated the standard, but I had a hand in writing it. And I spent many months with about 20 very committed individuals, and we did pour our hearts and souls into this. It's not perfect. It will go through revisions through its life cycle, but it will save lives.
Yeah. And we also have to thank BSI for doing this. When I started out the standard, I talked to a number of different standards bodies around the world to look at the idea of doing this. And I have to give real credit to BSI for maybe even having a bit of guts to go out and do the standard, because it's not maybe what most people think a standard is all about. But they realised that they could publish something that did great things. So, I'm, as well as thanking all the people who drafted the standard, all the people who have publicised it, all the people who got involved in the public consultation, but also BSI as well, I think, to support the idea of the standard. And by having it as a standard, we make a real statement about the quality of what is in that document. So go on, as I say, download it, use it.
You've got nothing to lose.
No. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. I'm just going to touch on, again, just to take a moment to acknowledge that it's been a really important conversation, really, really important conversation. And I'm aware that some of the things we've discussed might land differently with different people. Again, we are going to put some links in the notes, in the comments. Don't hesitate to reach out to somebody, I guess. Speak to somebody. And as Rosie said earlier, ask if somebody is okay, but ask twice. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening and watching. As always, we absolutely loved our guests and that they've taken the time out to get involved because they believe that people, policy and success really works. Remember to check out the links in the post and show notes and to head to the Dimension website for your free information sheet and more updates. See you next time.